going to first talk about the snowstorm. And I just want to say to all New Yorkers, I know how frustrated people are. I'm frustrated too. I'm frustrated as a New Yorker who was stuck in traffic like so many other people were. I'm frustrated as mayor of the city that for so many reasons, people didn't get what they should have had last night. Look, again, I have found a long time ago New Yorkers like straightforward explanations. They don't like to be toyed around with. In truth, this was a kind of perfect storm. It emerged bigger and later than anyone expected. Obviously affected the whole tri-state area in a very severe way. We had exceptional dynamics like the 20-car pileup on the George Washington Bridge, knocking out the outbound lanes of the George Washington Bridge, something I can't remember ever happening before. We had the early time of year and the impact on the trees and an extraordinary number of trees falling, something that hasn't typically happened in a lot of our storms. But all that gets back to a core reality, which is the timing. So we went into Wednesday night with estimates from the National Weather Service in the 1 to 2 inches of snow range. That's not a snowstorm that any of us would be afraid of. That's not a snowstorm where we're going to, use all the emergency measures and tell people don't go to work and stay off the roads and all. We've had, I remind you, a lot of us, have been through this together. The biggest snowstorm in New York City history, 28 inches, 29, whatever it was in the final analysis. There are times when we need to tell people don't even think about going to work, clear the roads, leave room for sanitation. Wednesday night we had no indication of that. Thursday morning we had no indication of that. I said earlier, I referred to what has typically been the 11 a.m. National Weather Service report. It turns out that the timing yesterday was later even than usual in terms of when we got the report. It was 12:36. Yesterday there was the first indication of 3 to 5 inches of snow. And again, normally 3 to 5 inches of snow would not have posed this kind of problem. It ended up coming exactly at the wrong time. It basically concentrated as the rush hour was beginning. Heavy, wet snow, heavier, faster than anyone expected. So there are a lot of reasons why things ended up the way they did. But that said, we are trying to learn some lessons and figure out what we can do better. So the first thing we're going to do is there will be a full audit review of everything that happened with the city agencies. We're also going to sit with our state partners because everyone is connected here, MTA, Port Authority, everyone. We all have to work it through together. Deputy Mayor Fulihan's timing is impeccable. The first deputy mayor and his team at the Office of Operations will lead that review. I think we're going to find that a lot of this was exceptional and unusual, and some of it beyond our control, but we're also going to find areas where we can do better. The central concern I have is that we have, as a city, done well when we can get information out to people early and in a clear way. We don't do as well when we don't get information to folks. This one is tough because the information broke so late, and I do think in retrospect we could have tried to say at 1 p.m., let's say, we're headed for a much bigger situation, go home immediately, leave work early. That might have helped. I think, unfortunately, to some extent, the die was cast by that point. People had already brought their cars into the city. I think it had a helpful effect, but I'm not sure it would have averted the essence of what we went through. So we want to do that review because we need to do better, but we also understand the essence of all this is having good information on a timely basis, and unfortunately that just was not the case yesterday. At this moment, after a very difficult time yesterday, and I'll say I know everyone's feeling among the agencies here, we're all unhappy with what happened. But I also want to say people worked very, very hard to try and address a situation that was exceedingly difficult. The agencies, I want to give particular thanks to the NYPD and the FDNY, who spent the whole night trying to undo traffic jams and get trees out of roads under very adverse circumstances. I know sanitation was trying to do all they could do, and a lot of times the core problem was they could not get to their locations because of the traffic. They needed to go back for salt, and there was no way to get back to their resupply. So people worked very hard, very intensely. I want to say as we got in the morning, and finally as sanitation had the ability to get out into roads that were not clogged by traffic, I think they did a good job on the overnight clearing up as much as possible and making things move better this morning. We still had some issues early in the morning in the Bronx, but you know, in the final analysis, under very, very adverse circumstances, I want to just say I think a lot of city agencies did everything they could do. But the essence of this, even if you say it's a, you know, an exceedingly unusual set of events that came together, we still can't let it happen again, and we have to learn from it. We have to drill for it. It was in the final analysis just over 6 inches of snow. That should not be able to have this impact on this city, and we have to figure out a way in the future to make sure that that does not happen again. Very quickly in Spanish. Al igual que la mayoría de los neoyorquinos, me siento frustrado por los problemas del tránsito anoche. Estábamos listos para la tormenta, pero nos golpeó más fuerte y más rápido de lo previsto. Hoy nuestras calles están despejadas y vamos a aprender de lo que sucedió ayer para mejorar en el futuro. With that, I want to just say procedurally take questions on the storm. Then I'm going to talk about DOI. We'll take some questions on that, and there may be some other questions as well.
Can you explain, and correct me if these numbers are incorrect, but I understand about a third of the plows that we had available were out.
A third of the plows?
Plows were out and about last night. And I think the question a lot of people have, it's our understanding that yes, salting did happen as soon as we saw snowflakes. But why in the world were only a third of the plows, if that number is correct, were used last night?
Can I stop you 1 second and go to Catherine? You're going to talk about the numbers, but I want you to start everyone again because it's a whole new winter with the thing that took me a while to fully understand, that when plows can actually start plowing, because I think most New Yorkers need to hear that.
Absolutely. Is this on? So yesterday into the morning, we make our plans the day before because obviously we need to call people in. We were planning for a 1-inch event, which is going to be primarily our salt spreaders. We did add plows to that in the late morning when we start to get rumblings that maybe something else would happen. At that point in time, our staffing going into the afternoon was allowing us to go up to about 700 plows. We can, when we get very, very big, our biggest number for a blizzard would be about 1,600. So there were points in time when we were between about 350 and 700 on the plowing side, depending on how many staff we had in, because we were in 3 shifts. We were not split.
You can call them up.
They would already all had been working that day. So everybody did work that day, but some had worked midnight to 8 the day on the overnight before. Some were working 6 to 6, and some were working starting at 4 o'clock.
Yeah,
all of them worked overtime, but we were in a 3 unevenly split shifts.
I just want to amplify this. So imagine you're in Catherine's shoes and you're hearing 1 inch, 2 inches, and that's salt only, or salt essentially, and then suddenly, you know, literally it's afternoon when you hear for the first time this thing has suddenly jumped up. Now, I will say one of the things we're going to work on is, and this is not a diss on the National Weather Service, they do extraordinary work, but, you know, we have been burned a few times, not because they're not trying, but because weather's unpredictable. You know, I think we're going to start being even more conservative. But even if you said, let's throw on a few more inches, you know, as Catherine said, our biggest, you know, when you have a blizzard, 20 inches, 25 inches, 28 inches, like that's when it's all hands on deck. When it's 2 inches, 3 inches, 4 inches, you couldn't imagine something like this possibly becoming what happened yesterday. Nonetheless, we have to figure out how to make the right adjustments. Yes.
Mr. Mayor?
Yeah.
Where exactly were you when you realized, 1, this is far worse than our expectations, and then 2, what can you do, or what should you have done to better prepare? I mean, what could have gotten you out of this?
So again, that's why I tried to give you an extensive, straightforward opening, that I think there were some limits about what we could do honestly. And again, my job is to offer New Yorkers straight talk, not platitudes. If the fuller facts became available after 12:30 and rush hour began, and rush hour officially begins at 3:30, 4 o'clock, we were already in a really bad situation. Now, that said, no, I will say personally, I had heard that the number went up, but per se, going up to 3 to 5 inches was not going to be a major weather event. We go through 3 to 5 inch storms all the time. It was my own personal experience. Left Gracie Mansion for an event at 6:30, and a few blocks into it, suddenly there's this crazy traffic on the FDR, and there's no other place to turn. I mean, something obviously was unusual, and I started calling everyone, and people started calling each other from their own experiences. But I think it's really important to note, the thing that I think we would have had a shot at is, with the right messaging very, very quickly, we might have been able to get some people off the road and have a better chance of clearing. The problem is, even hearing 3 to 5 inches would not have set off a sense of alarm. You couldn't have imagined what we saw. If I just said you were going to have 3 to 5 inches of snow, wouldn't in a million years have pictured what ended up really happening. We've had much worse snow and never had something like that. So this is a tough learning experience, because we got something we never would have been able to predict from those numbers.
There was no way to pivot.
I think that the reason we have to do a review is, I'm sure there were some ways to pivot, but I'm trying to be honest with you. I think in essence, the die was cast. Could we have gotten better information out? I think so. Could we have made some tactical moves that improved the situation? I think so. Could we have changed the basics? Not that late is my fear. Yeah, go ahead.
Mr. Mayor, what happened with your commute yesterday? Did you turn around? Did you keep going?
When I said at 6:30? Oh, I kept going, but it was ridiculous.
When did you get to where were you going?
It took I was going down to Gramercy Tavern for an event for Computer Science for All. It took like 20 or 25 more minutes than it normally would. And then going back to Gracie was another, 30, 40 minutes than it normally would have been, something like that.
Mr. Mayor, at CBS, we have been inundated with social media posts of people who are incredibly critical of the job that you did in the snowstorm. They say you were unprepared, that, you should step aside. Your reaction to those people? What do you say?
Marcia, I'm not going to dignify that question. You've been around a long time. I'm kind of surprised at you for asking a question like that. This city and this sanitation department have handled a series of major snowstorms with tremendous professionalism and effectiveness. I can't tell you how many New Yorkers, after the last big storms, acknowledged all the progress the sanitation department has made on vast, huge storms. This was a real unusual series of events. I'm not happy about it. We're going to do a full review. We're going to find ways to make it better. But I'm trying to be honest with people. I'm not going to give people an answer that says, oh, we had perfect knowledge and we could have come up with a perfect solution. Sometimes you get the knowledge you need too late to have a perfect solution. I think real people understand that.
You're basically telling people that you got the information too late, that the die was cast, and there was little that you could do at that point. Could you have said to people, listen, shelter in place, don't get on the roads until after we clear them?
If we had understood that 3 to 5 inches could result in this kind of impact, and I'll let the experts speak to it, and Polly as well. If you said to me, typical day in New York City in winter, 3 to 5 inches of snow, that's not a major snow event. I think if we had been able to understand, some of the dominoes that were falling, at some point we could have gotten out there with a much stronger message, say, stop everything, retreat, don't get on the roads and all. But I'm not sure it would have been in time. Even the information that we had gone from 1 or 2 inches to 3 to 5 inches, and again, I'm going to treat everyone here with respect and honor everyone's intelligence. If we've all experienced 28 inches, you'll understand why 3 to 5 inches doesn't put us in a state of fear. But at least, we saw something was moving. I think in retrospect, there may have been ways to say to people, beware. The thing that really would have been good, honestly, is if we had the information the night before and we told people don't go to work. That would have been the real difference maker. But what do you want to say to it?
No, I mean, absolutely. This was an incredibly difficult storm in terms of the fact that I think no one really knew that it was going to change so quickly. And it hit at a very, very challenging time right at rush hour and was coming down at 2 inches an hour. So it was at blizzard strength right at the moment when it was hitting. And it was difficult to cross all 5 boroughs, but the difference was we did keep moving in the other boroughs slowly, very slowly, and it made it possible for us to, by the late evening, be basically through Staten Island and Brooklyn and Queens. The GWB sort of clash, the crash that occurred there, we ended up having much of our equipment on the Henry Hudson, the FDR, the Bruckner, the Cross Bronx, the Sheridan, the Major Deegan, and it meant that we couldn't move, and if we can't move, we can't work. It really did take actually partnering with PD to actually do escorts and bring us the wrong way up onto some highways to be able to get up there and assist. When we brought in additional equipment in the overnight hours into the Bronx, we had to bring it sort of from the eastern side of Queens because the Triborough was still very backed up and we didn't want to have any more pieces of equipment trapped. So it was going to be a very big storm, but I think the accidents that occurred on the roads made it very difficult to recover from.
So do you think the Port Authority should have done a better job with the GWB?
I'm
Should have done a better job in clearing the roads they're responsible for, like the Cross Bronx and the Deegan and all of those roads?
I think that everyone was operating under information that we were looking at a 1-inch storm, and also where it was supposed to end by 5 o'clock with temperatures into the 40s. I don't think any of them could have prepared for this storm, which was very different across the region. So I am sure that we will talk. And I know that Commissioner Trottenberg has already reached out to her counterparts to start thinking about what are the pieces of information that we could have worked on jointly, if there are any. And I mean, at a certain point in time, I literally couldn't get a spreader out from the FDR for hours and hours and hours.
Let's see. Yeah.
Earlier today, the City Council Speaker Corey Johnson apologized to New Yorkers for what happened and the city's response. Do you feel that you owe New Yorkers an apology?
I want to say, look, I am very frustrated at what happened. I think it was a horrible experience for New Yorkers. I'm upset that New Yorkers went through it. I don't think it's fair to say that the city agencies could have stopped all of this. I'm not going to do that because I think that's just too convenient. You know, if people want to blame city agencies on something that they literally could not have stopped, I'm not going to be party to that. Am I frustrated? Do I want to make sure this never happens again? Absolutely. Yeah.
Mr. Mayor, the decision to keep the school open was basically made on the data that you were receiving. However, we have some reports of children that were stuck in buses till late hours. I'm just wondering if there was anything that could have been done to, a situation for those kids. Some of them, we were told, were there until midnight, and then today they had to go to school. And
Yeah.
a lot of the plans, the field trips were not canceled for today and so forth.
So,
the aftercare program.
I got it. Let me have the chancellor speak to the specifics on the big question. So the way we look at schools and the decision to close, we clearly weren't going to close yesterday. We went through the whole school day and there was almost no snow until the school day was over. And today, as you saw, sanitation, because of the work overnight, the roads mainly were clear and would be no consideration of closing school in that situation. But I think you're absolutely right. Some really unfortunate things happened that we do not want to see ever happen again. I was a public school parent. I never want to see public school parents have to go through what they went through last night. It was not a lot of kids, thank God, but for anyone who experienced it, it was absolutely unfair. And the chancellor will speak to what he's learned and what he's going to do about it. But the thing I want to say about all of this is we are going to hone giving people warnings whenever humanly possible. I think if Wednesday night we had said, brace yourselves, massive storm, you all would have said it's 1 to 2 inches predicted, why are you crying wolf? So we couldn't have done that. But the second that we have information that starts to cause concern, we've got to figure out the right way to get the right information and the right message out to people. Chancellor. Do both, please.
Sure, so I'll do both. So we did have a number of children last night that were on bus routes that were delayed. Some were delayed from 1 to 2 hours. There were a good number that were delayed from anywhere from 2 to 5 hours. The last student this morning, with the help of NYPD, because the bus was stuck, got home about 3 in the morning. So it is absolutely not the circumstances we want for our children. But I do want to say this. Our first priority is to make sure that children will be safe. And yesterday, every student got home safely. We had no incidents of students being injured. So for us, we're very grateful for that. We had extraordinary work that was done by our bus drivers yesterday. Bus drivers that sat with children, waiting for their parents who were also stuck in the same traffic to come pick up the students. We had students that were coming back from a college visit in Pennsylvania that were stuck because they couldn't get into the city. We had teachers and administrators and school support personnel that stayed with students. We had teachers and support personnel stay overnight in some of our schools, some of them because they couldn't get home because the roads weren't passable, and some of them because they stayed there so late with children that they wanted to make sure everybody was okay. So this was a cascading event, but again, we don't want that. It was a perfect storm, as the mayor has mentioned. It hit right when those buses started to roll, taking kids home. Unas cuantas palabras en español. Sí tuvimos anoche unos niños, una circunstancia en cuanto estudiantes estuvieron en los camiones. Algunos camiones estuvieron tardados hasta 2 horas, otros camiones fueron tardados de entre 2 a 5 horas. El último estudiante anoche, y yo sé porque me quedé despierto hasta que me dieron el reporte, llegó a casa casi a las 3 de la mañana. Entonces, no queremos eso, pero las circunstancias que ha dicho el señor alcalde, que fue una tormenta perfecta y las circunstancias perfectas que no nos ayudaron a prevenir ese asunto. Si lo que estamos muy agradecidos es de que todos los estudiantes anoche llegaron a casa bien y sanos, y los adultos que estuvieron cuidándolos, les doy las gracias porque se quedaron a asegurar que llegaran bien y sanos a su casa.
Mayor, last month you appointed Commissioner Garcia to also be a lead czar for the city. Obviously, responding to snowstorms is a huge task. Are you concerned at all that having, a commissioner handle 2 different, very important jobs could lead to, one or the other maybe not getting enough attention?
It's a fair question, but that's not what I've seen in any way, shape, or form. First of all, the Commissioner has 5 years under her belt of responding to every kind of storm, including a storm that was 5 times, literally 5 times bigger than this one. And she also has an extraordinary leadership team. There's no question. The sanitation department is very, very well run. And I know from the constant dialogue yesterday afternoon and evening with the commissioner, she was at the command post focused on addressing this. So good question, but the answer to me is no, that's not an issue.
Mayor Blasio, when the city does a great job or when there are no issues during a storm, there's often like a press conference where you congratulate the various agency heads. Who should take responsibility for what happened yesterday? You won't apologize on behalf of the city, and you say it's unfair for New Yorkers to be critical of the agencies.
No, I did not. Hold on, come on. I didn't say it's unfair to be critical. I said don't put it all on the agencies as if the agencies created this problem. It's a very complex problem. Guys, I understand complexity is not always your friend when you're trying to break down the information to the people. But please, hold on. Please be serious about the subject matter. Some of this is what we're saying. I mean, from the very beginning, I'm saying we're doing a full review because we want to figure out what happened, what we could do better, and I said up front, I'm certain there's some things we could do better, but we need a review to understand it better. Second, some of this was beyond the control of any city agency, and the information came in very late. So when you say, like, give us the individual or the person to blame or give us a nice, clean, easy story, I'm not going to do that because we don't have a clean, easy story. Well, you are asking who to blame. We don't know, first of all, because we haven't done a review, and second of all, it's not about one person or one agency. This is an extraordinarily unusual situation. I don't remember the George Washington Bridge outbound in rush hour being knocked out before, one example. This had a huge cascading effect. No one could have predicted that. Now, there are some things I think we could have done better, but we need to look at those very carefully and give people a clear, honest answer of what we're going to do. Yes?
Mayor, as far as, on the topic of these school buses, though, some parents complained that they had no idea where their kids were, and they reached out to police 311, and they had no way of knowing where. That obviously adds another level of terror on them.
Absolutely.
So is there no way to communicate with parents?
No, this is an area that has to be fixed, and this is more than just about this storm. For some reason, our school bus service has always had a trouble communicating with parents. It's not acceptable. I have raised this issue for years. As everyone knows, there was a leadership change made very forcefully by the chancellor because what we saw there was unacceptable on many levels. But I will give the chancellor an instruction right now, but I know he already is planning to do it. We need anything that's not working with GPS and every conceivable form of communication, and then linked back to a center that parents can call and get updated information. I mean, we should be able to do that with a government of this ability. We've got to get that done. And that is not just for snowstorms. That's for every day. Yeah.
On the issue of lessons learned, given that storms can change, is one lesson that you yourself have, that if the forecast is 1 or 2 inches, it might make sense to urge New Yorkers to not drive into work. Even there, just to accommodate for the fact that weather changes from this storm.
I don't think people would take that with a straight face. I think they'd say, what on earth are you talking about? I mean, people have a living to make. And look, we all love to say, everyone just take mass transit. I understand for a lot of people that's not easy. And a car might be the only realistic option. But if I were to tell, guys, I'm sure later on we might talk about Amazon. It's the same thing. If we had not gotten Amazon, all your tough questions would be, how did you lose Amazon? So if I had called red alert with 1 or 2 inches of snow, you would have said, crying wolf, all this.
I'm not saying red alert. I'm saying we know this is a 1 to 2. It might be a good idea if you can.
I don't think anyone would believe that. That's my problem. I think when people have stayed off the roads, it's when we have a good alignment of what we do and what you do. So I was struck one of the times where we said snow emergency, stay off the roads. And we projected it for hours and hours and hours the day before. But everyone in the media was also giving constant reports of how bad it was going to be. And I was stunned at how much people honored the alert, stayed off the roads. Sanitation was able to do extraordinary things, even with, as I said, 4 or 5 times as much snow. So I don't think you can do it 1 or 2 inches. I think you can say, whatever the Weather Service says, just come up with some formula. We're going to assume X amount more. But even if that went to 3 to 5 inches, it's kind of hard to tell people, don't go to work, don't use your car in only 3 to 5 inches of snow.
A few more on this, and then we're going to
Yeah.
get a very, like the dominoes you mentioned. I mean, we want to be able to explain to readers. I have to write an article giving some idea of what happened. Not about who to blame, but what happened? What are, besides the bridge?
So I want to turn to both Catherine and Polly, but I would say, and Terry had extraordinary experiences trying to respond from a PD level. I think you should explain what that was like for you as well, and I really want to commend you because you were literally out there trying to move cars yourself with your bare hands, and I admire that. But I want to emphasize, I think if you take the bridge out of this equation, it's an entirely different discussion. So if you say you want to write the ultimate story of what happened, 20-car pile-up George Washington Bridge, entirely knocking out the ability of a huge number of commuters to leave New York City for hours. Everything starts to cascade down the West Side Highway, down the East Side, across Bronx, like everything. I think that was, and you all are the experts, seems to me from having talked about this all night and all morning with these guys, #1 factor, but take it away.
And what caused that? If the bridge was properly plowed and salted?
Go ahead,
I mean,
Paul.
I talked to my counterparts, and I certainly want to echo what the mayor said. I talked to the Port Authority, and I think one of the other weather factors that was unforeseen was that the temperature plummeted. This event had been described as something where it was not going to get below freezing and everything was going to melt. It got icy. and not just on the George Washington Bridge, Bayonne Bridge, Cross Bronx, Major Deegan, a bunch of places where trucks and cars started slipping and sliding. It produced, and Chief Monahan can talk about this, a cascading number of crashes and incidents, which became an enormous amount for everybody to respond to. But the mayor is right. The George Washington Bridge is one of the largest movers of traffic in the entire United States of America. And when it went down, it had a ripple effect that was profound. And of course, that ripple effect slowed buses. Buses slowed, cars got stuck behind buses, plows couldn't move. There was that cascade.
Either one.
Yeah, I'll jump in. And if you look at that cascade and talking about people now trying to get off those expressways because they weren't moving, you can't get over the bridge. People tried to find other routes on the side streets. They were slipping, they were sliding. We had 1,915 accidents in a 12-hour period from noon to midnight. That's 1,200 more than in that same 12-hour period last year. So now that accident is preventing anyone from crossing those intersections. And it kept going out and out. You would get one intersection cleared, people would be able to go a couple of blocks. Now our next intersection is blocked. It was one thing. I was in the Bronx for 4 hours attempting to drive around during that storm, and you'd have to get out at every other intersection and try and help people that were stuck within intersection, stuck in the snow. But it was great to see New Yorkers, as frustrated as they were in their cars, jumping out to help someone else to move theirs, get them off to the side. There were a lot of inexperienced drivers that were on the road. You had to tell them how to hold the car wheels, how to rock a car to be able to get some movement. But New Yorkers were out there helping one another, getting them out during that period.
Amen.
Were there extra officers deployed, especially in the Bronx and those areas, to help deal with the GWB? Was the tour extended yesterday? Or?
Tour wasn't extended. By the time that started cascading, the day tour had already left. Cops that were working until 6, we kept them on tour after that. We had cops out on intersections, but as you cleared one intersection, people were going to the next intersection, and it was there. There was such a cascading effect. Every time you cleared a block, there was another issue that would happen a few blocks later.
A question about the bridge. Was it properly, salted? The GWB, the accident.
I mean, I think you have to talk to the Port Authority about, but I think one of the things everyone struggled with was, not everything got salted in time before these crashes started to occur, and I think that's part of what happened to them, but double check with them. I think that was part of what they were struggling with.
Okay, hold on, let's keep going. We're only going to do a few more. Go ahead.
The amount of resources that you all deployed yesterday, both in terms of spreaders, plows, personnel, how did that compare to the amount that you usually deploy when you have advance notice of 5 or 6 inches of snow?
So, and I want to just make sure we're all speaking the same language. So, if the deployment decisions are made the day before, by and large, with 1 to 2 inch range, right. The adjustment moment, the pure factual adjustment moment was 12:30 yesterday afternoon. But so the question you're saying is, if you went ahead and if you had the forewarning you got at 12:30, what would that kind of deployment look like?
Right, and then how did it ramp up after you got the update?
So there are two things here. So one is, if we had known we were in a 3 to 5, which is plowable snow, we would have split the shift, which means that we would have gone to 12-hour tours. Everyone worked 12 hours yesterday. They just worked it in a staggered fashion, which makes things a little bit bumpier. So we would have had all our spreaders out, nearly 700 spreaders, and then we would have had an additional 1,600 plows on each of those 2 12-hour shifts. In the configuration that we were in, it ranged from all the spreaders were out, and then it was an additional either 350 to 700 plows that were added on. The one thing I'll say, and I have been thinking about this, is at the point in which we stopped moving in the Bronx and Upper Manhattan, would additional equipment have helped? And I think that's something that we will review, because I'm not sure that the answer is an absolute yes. The other thing I want to tell you is that in the Bronx, they were actually, by 3 o'clock, had done, on average, more than the rest of the city had done in terms of putting salt down. The rest of the city, across the city, it had averaged about 56% of all roads had salt put down by 3 p.m. before the worst of it hit, and the Bronx was ahead. So in my going into the evening rush hour, my feeling is like they're doing really, really well out there. And then everything in Upper Manhattan and the Bronx came to a complete halt.
Go ahead.
Chancellor, do you have any numbers on the school bus delays? How many school buses were delayed by a significant amount of time? How many children? And then also, what do you say to those parents who waited 6 hours after 1 a.m. with no idea where their child was? We spoke to a dad whose special needs son was on a bus for 6 hours with, no food and no bathroom.
Yes, so again, perfect storm, and it's unacceptable. As the mayor mentioned, we're working right now on having those tracking systems on all of our buses. Even in those specific cases where students were on buses for extended periods of time, the adults on those buses did extraordinary work to keep them safe, keep them warm, keep them out of harm's way. Again, so it's unacceptable. We know that approximately 10 to 12% of our entire bus routes, over 8,000 bus routes, 10 to 12% of them were impacted by the storm yesterday. So they were delayed to significantly delayed. I would say the case that you used as an example would be a significant delay. And there was a cascading effect with that as well, which we saw this morning as well. So as those bus drivers, remember, some of them start their routes at 4:30, 5 o'clock in the morning, and then you get to 1 o'clock in the morning. Now they've been driving for so long, they couldn't take their routes this morning. So there was a cascading effect in terms of capacity. When you knock out 10 to 12% of your bus drivers, it creates a real safety issue. So again, to those parents, one thing that I do want to make sure is that as those cases became known to us, we were making phone calls to those parents and letting them know. And then today we've had a whole process where we've been making phone calls. I even made some calls to parents as well. And I will say to you that the parents that I've spoken to were very frustrated, just like the mayor is, but they were also very understanding. And at the end of most of the cases, they were very grateful that their children got home safely.
Okay, do a few more.
Mr. Mayor,
back there, yes.
does this at all solidify the hypothesis to you that there are just too many people relying on cars in this city, and change your calculus at all on something like congestion pricing?
There's unquestionably too many cars, and we believe in this city that we have got to consistently get people out of cars. I think the number one way to do that is more and better mass transit, which is why we're doing more select bus service, we're doing more ferry service, we're going to have the BQX, a lot of other things. I have said repeatedly that I remain open on the conversation on congestion pricing if the underlying fairness issue can be addressed. I have not seen that kind of proposal yet, but I'm open. But I just also want to be real. That would address a piece, theoretically, a piece of the problem. It does not address your beginning of your question, which is people are too reliant on their cars and we have to help them have a real better alternative. Yes.
A lot of parents still want to know why after-school activities were canceled when the weather was fine today.
So I really want to emphasize this point that all the pieces connect. Richard's going to talk about the fact that when school bus service got messed up, that had ramifications for after school. We need to, if we decide in a case like that, that something needs to be canceled, there's not going to be enough personnel there to take care of the kids. It's not going to be safe. We've got to find a way to get that word out as early as humanly possible because parents have a lot of arrangements they have to make, a lot of changes they have to make. I know when my kids were young, when there was anything that changed about their schedule, it sent us into a frenzy to try and come up with an alternative. I want to make sure we're very, very sensitive to parents on that. But Richard, can you talk about exactly why those changes had to be made? Sure.
So again, student safety is paramount in this particular situation. So knowing what happened last night into early this morning, the 10 to 20%, 10 to 12% of our bus fleet and drivers that were impacted. We had bus drivers that just couldn't come in this morning. We also know that I've talked a little bit about faculties that stayed at their schools. We also know that our teachers and our faculty members got home very late last night because they were stuck in the traffic as well. So as we started getting those reports this morning and accurate information about what that cascading impact was for us, it became very apparent to us that we we weren't going to have the bus capacity to support field trips, which is the first thing we called off this morning. As we got more and more information, it became very apparent that after-school transportation was going to be an issue, and also personnel to supervise those after-school activities. So we called it off as early as we could. But to the mayor's point, we always want to give parents as much information as early as possible to be able to make those decisions. So one of the after-action items that we're reviewing in the DOE is how do we make that communication protocol earlier as well, so parents have that information. But it's also one of these cases, I mean, I've been in education for a long time. You never make the perfect decision. But, you know, yesterday the criticism was, why didn't you call off school at the very late hour of, 12:30, 1 o'clock in the afternoon? And today, we called off programs early in the morning, but why did you call them off so early? So it's one of those things, and I get the frustration from parents. We are working hard to get you as much information as early as possible to make those decisions as possible.
Take one more. If there's anything we haven't covered on snow, going once, twice, last one. Yes.
Let's talk about the damage and the trees that fell and how that was all handled.
Yeah, I do want, Mitch, you have those numbers?
I do. As of 3:30, I'm getting reports every hour. There are about almost 3,000 service requests, and that includes downed trees, dangling limbs, and falling limbs. Now, service request is a complaint that we get in. We're trying to determine by doing an inspection what exactly is the nature and if those are duplicate or triplicate calls. We do know that majority of the calls are coming from Manhattan, which is rare, and so we're deploying extra crews from Brooklyn and Queens. Our priority first is to clear the streets so that people can move through and emergency responders can get through. We do want to thank both NYPD and fire because they responded overnight when trees started coming down. Our crew started 6 a.m. this morning, and they'll be working 12-hour shifts over the next few days to inspect and address both the downed trees and the limbs. So there were some cases where it actually immobilized traffic as well. That's why we prioritize making sure we clear the streets so that vehicles can get through.
Can I
Right.
just add, it
Yeah,
was just,
please.
because you were asking for cascading factors, and we did neglect to mention, just the other kind of unusual thing about the storm, I think we were looking, it's been many, many decades that you've had a storm with this kind of snow levels and wind. Obviously, the trees still have some leaves on them because it's still
Right.
earlier
But they have it
into
this early in
fall.
the season.
So we did have more tree limbs falling than we ordinarily would have had, and that is certainly another cascading factor. Once they block roadways, getting in and removing them is a job.
As well as potentially some of the wind gusts having the leaves, the wind, particularly in Manhattan, because it is unusual. Usually Queens, in some cases the Bronx, get hardest hit with trees coming down. This case, it was Manhattan. That's why we mobilized additional crews to Manhattan to keep up with the demand.
Okay, we're going to stop there for a second. My colleague commissioners are going to head out and go back to work. Anyone from media who needs to make your transition, do it now, and then we're going to go on and talk about DOI.